So first, when we think about our gaps and our alignments, when we think about a gap, there are two ways that you can play defensive line, and one is in a gap system, and the other would be in a man system. So in a gap system, every player would have a gap, and what a gap is basically a place, or a gap is a space between two offensive players that a running back or a quarterback could run through. So as a defense, we want all of our gaps covered, so there's nowhere for the running back or for the quarterback to run. So if you could see on the right side or on the right picture here, we have our center, and between our center and our guard on both sides, we have our A gaps. And so we have a weak side A gap and a strong side A gap. And then between our guard and our tackle, we have our B gaps on both sides. And then outside of our tackles, and if there's a tight end, there's our C gap. And then if you look one down up into our heads up position, so you'll see the even numbers, which is the 0, the 2, the 4, and the 6. So all of our 0 numbers basically mean that we're head up alignment on the offensive player. So if we're in our 0 technique, then we're head up on the center. If we're in our 2 technique, we're head up on the guard. If we're in our 4 technique, we're head up on the tackle. And you can see there's a 6 there. So if there's a tight end in the game, you say we're in a 6 technique, we'd be head up on the tight end. And if you look to that bottom row on that right side, you see the odd numbers. So the 1, 3, the 5, and the 7. So if we're in our 1 technique, we're outside shade of the center. If we're in our 3 technique, we're outside shade of the guards on both sides. If we're in our 5 technique, we're outside shades of the tackle. And then our 7 technique, if there was a tight end in the game, then we'd be our outside shade of that tight end. And then we'll go back up to that second row if you could see it. So the 0, the 2i, the 4i, and the 6i. So that's used when we want to be inside shade. So our 2i would be our inside shade of our guards, and our 4i would be our inside shades of our tackles, and 6i would be inside shades of the tight ends. So just say it one more time. Our A gaps, B gaps, C gaps, those are the space between the guards and the tackles. Even numbers are heads up. Odd numbers are outside shade. If it's an even number with an I in between it, that means we're inside shade of that same player. So the first thing we're going to talk about quickly is going to be our most basic overfront. So basically in our overfront, it's really simple, but in our overfront, our strength is going to be determined by where we are on the field. So in an overfront, our strength is going to be to the field side. And what we do with this strength is our strength is going to be determined by where we want the tackles and the linebackers to be placed. So in an overfront, we want our 3 technique to the field side of the field, and we want our 1 technique to the boundary. With this, we'd have our Mike in our strong side A gap, and we have our Will in our weak side B gap. So what this allows us to do, if you think about it, we'll have a running back offside here. Let's think that our running back is running to the field right now in a field zone play. What this would cause, because we have this tackle and the strong side end in these 2 B gaps and C gaps, it would cause him to cut back into this A gap right here, into the soft A gap that the Mike is playing. And then what we're going to have is we're going to have our end playing this post shimmy player. And then this end is going to be our cutback boot reverse player. You can see my screen now?
Yeah, you're perfect.
All right, awesome, perfect. Okay, so we're talking about the overplay. So we're looking at the field. So the field is on the left side. And you can see we have that 3 technique to the field. We have our 1 technique to the boundary. And then we have that Will in that backside B gap. And then we have that Mac, and we have that Mike in that strong side A gap. The 2 things that we're going to look for, especially as defensive ends, just talking about different technique, is we have a pre-snap eye progression and we have a post-snap eye progression. So for our pre-snap eye progression, we want to look at a couple different things. So we want to think of 3 different things in our mind. And that's we want to think of the box, the back, and the line of scrimmage. So when I say that, when we're looking at the box, I mean anything in between and around the tackles in that area. So we're looking for anything dangerous or anything coming towards us that could be a threat. So if you see on the left side, if you see number 3, he's looking towards down the line, we need to be able to see that as defensive ends, because he could be a load player or he could be a bomber player and he could come in and block us. So we need to be able to see that. The second thing is we need to be able to see is the back. So where the back is located. And that will tell us a lot as defensive linemen. So if we're on the same side as the back, that will tell us that we're the Sally side player. So that means we're on the side where if it's a zone read play, the quarterback will take the ball and potentially run it or throw it. And if we're away from the back, so offset the back, that would tell us that we're the zone player. So if there was a run play happening, then the run would happen to our side. So if you look at that, we'll just let this play through, but you'll see every player has a gap in this situation. So we have our A gap accounted for. We have our strong side A gap. You see him playing that. We have our strong side B gap. We have our Mike number 4 playing that strong side A gap. We have our weak side A gap played by the nose. And then we have the Will and the end playing that backside B gap, that B gap and that C gap. Pretty simple, easy stuff. So same thing. You see number 5 shuffling down to play that cut. Same thing that you want to know. So you want to think of a post-snap eye progression. So in our post-snap eye progression, the first thing that we need to see is we need to see the hip of the tackle. So we need to see that hip of the tackle go down. And as soon as we see that hip go down, we need to have our eyes into the backfield and need to see any danger coming across us to make sure that we can play this cut player right there. And then once we see that, we could look at if we do see an exchange point for the quarterback, then we can look at the exchange point for the quarterback. But that's just a basic overfront.
Those comments on eye progression, that's, when we talk about things that high school athletes can use that maybe your coaches don't have time, right? When you're thinking about a high school team, you have priorities. Safety number 1. You have to teach all the safe contact stuff. You have to teach all the basic fundamental, alignment, assignment. What does that even mean? It can be tough. And I know this as a guy who coaches summer football with high school age guys myself. When there's so much to learn, we often learn the same thing over and over because the coaches have to coach to relatively the group that knows the least, right? You just because one kid in your grade 10 class can handle university calculus doesn't mean that the teacher can teach university calculus. So I think these are some of the things when you talk about pre and post snap eye progression, how much, whether it's U Sport or NCAA or pro players, are able to gather pre-snap. It's just as easy, if not easier, to do in high school because teams will have more tells, right? Like I think we all have that feeling of, hey, if I went back to high school, it wouldn't even be the physical stuff that would help me now. It would be the mental side of it. You talk about being on the Sally side or being on the zone side. If you guys take one thing from this conversation, like that's a great point right there to take away.
Yeah, for sure. So just to say it one more time. So pre-snap eye progression, box, back, line of scrimmage, post-snap eye progression, hip of the tackle, down the line of scrimmage, and then the exchange point of the quarterback, especially if you're that Sally side player. And when I play these next clips, you're going to see the same principles over and over again. And I'm going to keep talking about it so you can see how relevant those eye progressions are and how much they can help you. So that was over. Pretty simple. So now our next concept is an under. So let's think again that our field is to the right side. So in an over, when we think our 3 tech was to the field, now in an under front, our 3 tech is going to be to the boundary side of the play. So with that, our nose tackle or our nose guard is going to be to the field side of the play. So literally they're just switching positions. So here you see the 3 tech is to the boundary and the 1 technique is to the field. In an over, it's the opposite. The 3 technique is to the field, the nose is to the boundary. What this does is this also changes the location of our Will and our Mike players right here. So nothing else changes for these 2 defensive ends, but just a quick thing. So you could see that this B gap right here, because it's played by this Mike from depth, there's a little bubble and the guard will be able to get a little more depth and be able to climb up to the Mike. So this isn't always a great situation if the zone is coming in this direction, but it is good for some other plays, like if we're running or like if the other team runs a lot of power and stuff like that. But I'll show you guys something that we could do to something that you could do to add on top of that to provide a better look for that.